Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to solve SQL interview question that has been asked in American Express. The question is on calculating the average transaction amount per year for each user. So let's begin. So the question is, imagine that you are an analyst at American Express and you have a database table named transactions which contains the transaction data of the users. So this is the input table that you have. So transaction ID is nothing but a unique identifier for each transaction. User ID is the ID of the user who made the transaction. Transaction date is the date when the transaction happened, and transaction amount is the amount spent in the transaction made by the user. Now your task is to calculate the average transaction amount per year for each user, specifically for the years 2018 to 2022. So let's take a look at the input table and the output table over here. So here is the table. Now taking a look at the input table, you can see that for the user ID 269 has made the transaction on 15th of August with the transaction amount. Let's say this transaction amount is in dollars, so it has made the transaction as $500. Similarly, keeping the transaction ID second with the user ID 478 has made the transaction on 25th of November with the transaction amount 400, and so on for the upcoming user IDs. Now, since we have been asked to calculate the average transaction amount per year for each user, specifically for the years between 2018 to 2022, so your result should look like this. It should have three columns in the table. One column that denotes the year, then another that denotes the user ID, and the third column that denotes the average transaction amount for that particular user ID in that specific year. Now, if you see for the year 2018, there are two transactions have been made, one with the user ID 269 and another with the user ID 478. So that there are only one transaction. So the average amount for this is going to be the same, that is 500. Similarly, for the user ID 478, the total amount is 400, and therefore the average transaction amount is going to be the same, that is 400. Now taking a look at the year 2019, we can see that there is only one transaction having the transaction ID 3 made by the user 269. So since there is one transaction on the date, which is this one 01/05/2019, and the transaction amount is 1000, so keeping the total amount as 1000, therefore the average amount is also 1000. And similarly for the year 2020, 2021, and 2022. So as we can see here that each row in the output represents the average of transaction amounts for a user in the specific year. So since each user has only one transaction per year in the input table, so the average is equal to the transaction amount for that year. Now let's just take a look at the solution steps and the thinking approach to solve this problem. So our first step would be to understand the problem. Since our goal is to calculate the average transaction amount per user for each user within the range of years between 2018 to 2022. So we need to actually group the data by year and user and then compute the average for each group. So that's how the very first step is, just to understand that what is something that we need to calculate and what is our goal. Now coming to the second step, we can see that we have to convert the transaction date column to the date format, since we don't know whether it's in date format or in the string format. So first of all, we have to make sure that the column is in the date or date time format. Now coming to the third step, it is to extract the year from the transactions date, since we have been asked to focus only on transactions which have been made from the year 2018 to 2022. So that's why we just have to extract those years. And in the fourth step, we have to filter those relevant years using where clause. And the fifth step is, as we already discussed in the step 1, we need to group the data by year and user, since we want to ensure that the average is computed separately for each user for each year. That's why we need to group the data by year and user. Now coming to the last step, we just need to calculate the average transaction amount by using the average function on the transaction amount column to calculate the average transaction amount for each user and year group. So that's how we are just going to proceed with the solution. So let's now move on to my SQL workbench to implement this. Guys, coming to the interface of MySQL Workbench, you can see that this is the transactions table, which is our input table over here. We have been asked to calculate now since the average transaction amount per user for each user, specifically for the years between 2018 to 2022. So since our first step was to convert the transaction date column to date format, so let's first do that. So here I'm just going to begin writing my query over here. So select, and now I just want to convert the transaction date column to date format. So for that I will be making use of string to date, str to string to date function, which is defined in MySQL. But if you're working in PostgreSQL, then you can just make use of toDate function. So this is for MySQL. So here transaction date, and your format has to be month first, then slash, then day slash, then year, right? So this is how your format has to be. Now since we want to extract the year, so I'm going to write year on this. So this will actually extract the year. That has to be your first column that needs to be extracted. Now second one is the user ID, and the third one is the average that we are just going to compute after doing everything. So this is from my transactions table. Now where this the year that you just extracted, so this year has to be between 2018 and 2022, and at the last you will just have to apply the group by clause on the year and user ID, since you want to compute the average transaction amount for each user for that specific year. So that's why you want to do that. And now to compute the average, we are just going to make use of the average function on the transaction amount column. Transaction amount column. So this will just compute the average transaction amount. Okay, so that's how it's going to happen. Let's just proofread this. Okay, so this has to be in 1 second, guys. Okay, now again this has to be in comma. Okay, yeah, so let's just run this, and you're able to see that the query generates one row for each user ID for every year from 2018 to 2022, and the output includes year, transaction year, user IDs, which is the client's identifier, and average transaction amount for all the transactions made by the client during that year. So that's how you just got your desired outcome. So I'll quickly help you understand all the steps that we just did. So in the select clause, what we did over here is we just converted the transaction date column to date format, since this was in the string format initially. So this is how the date format has to be: month, date, and then year. And then we just extracted the function. We just use the year function to extract the year from a date value, since transaction date is stored as a string in the format. So we first converted into a date using string to date function, and then we just extracted the years, since we want to apply condition that our year has to be between 2018 and 2022. Second, we wanted to extract the user ID, since the column represents the client ID used to group the data for calculating averages. And the average function actually calculates the average transaction amount for each group of data defined in the group by clause. So this is the from transactions clause. Now coming to the where clause, we just applied the condition that we want our year to be between 2018 and 2022, and at the last we just applied the group by clause on the year column and the user ID column, since we wanted to make sure that we are calculating the average for each unique combination of year and user ID. So that's how we just got our output. I hope you understood solution. So that's all about this video, guys. Let's meet in the next video. Thank you for watching the video.